"Daddy, Mommy put something in your glass." That was what the 7-year-old girl whispered to her Mafia boss father. In the middle of a peace treaty dinner hosted at the Castellano estate, the crime boss of New York's most feared family calmly swapped his crystal flute with his wife's right under the watching eyes of every captain in the room. 2 hours later, what happened at that table left every man present frozen in his seat, but not for the reason anyone expected. If this story has you hooked already, hit subscribe, because we post stories like this one every week. Drop a like and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. We love knowing where our people come from. The Castellano estate rose out of the Sag Harbor coastline, like something carved from another century. Limestone walls, wrought iron balconies, and a gravel drive lined with black sedans, whose drivers never quite stopped watching the trees. Inside, the great dining hall glowed under 3 crystal chandeliers imported from Murano, each one casting a fractured halo onto the long mahogany table where 11 men sat in silence as the first course was cleared. Romano captains on the left, Castellano captains on the right. In the middle, at the head, sat Lorenzo Castellano, 37 years old, wearing the same charcoal suit his father had been buried in, refitted by a tailor in Little Italy who knew better than to ask questions. Lorenzo kept his hands flat on the linen, while crime boss Romano spoke about territory, shipping routes, shared enemies. He nodded at the right moments. He listened for the things beneath the words. Across from him, the woman the household knew as Adriana Castellano sat in a dove-gray silk dress, her dark hair swept up, a strand of pearls resting on her collarbone like an old promise. She laughed softly at something the Romano advisor said, and the sound was exactly the sound Lorenzo had known for 10 years of marriage. Light, throaty, perfectly timed. Behind her chair, half hidden by the drapes of the east archway, stood Sophia, 7 years old, barefoot on the cold marble because she had slipped out of her bedroom past Mrs. O'Brien. Her small hands were pressed flat against the doorframe, and her eyes had not left her mother's wineglass since the servers had poured it. Sophia crossed the marble without a sound. Nobody looked at a child during men's business, and that was how she reached her father. She climbed onto the side of his chair, tucked her face into the collar of his jacket so no lip reader in the room could catch her, and said the sentence that would unravel everything. Lorenzo did not flinch. His free hand came up and rested on Sophia's back, steady, as if she had only come to ask for a sip of water. But across the table he had already seen it, a flicker, half a second long, in Adriana's eyes. A calculation. Not fear, not confusion. Calculation. And a man who had spent 15 years reading faces at tables exactly like this one did not miss a thing like that, even when the face belonged to the woman he loved. He had lost faith in his daughter 4 times already this year. 4 stories, 4 lies, 4 disappointments stacked against her small frame. Tonight would make 5. And yet his hand, the same hand that had signed death warrants without a tremor, would not let him lift his own glass. "A toast," Lorenzo said, rising, lifting Adriana's flute instead of his own in one fluid motion, smiling at the Romano patriarch across the table. "To trust, the rarest vintage in our line of work." He watched his wife's smile freeze for a single heartbeat. Then she reached, without protest, for the glass he had left behind. Adriana lifted the swapped glass, touched its rim against Lorenzo's borrowed one, and drank. Not a sip, the whole pour, in 3 long swallows, her throat moving under the pearls. When she set the crystal back on the linen, empty, she tilted her head at her husband with something close to amusement. "Trust," she echoed softly. "To trust, then." The Romano patriarch laughed and raised his own glass, mistaking the moment for theater. The table laughed with him because the table always laughed when a crime boss laughed. Only Tommaso Vitali, seated 3 chairs down, advisor to the Castellanos since the day Lorenzo's father was buried, kept his eyes locked on Sophia, who had gone very still against her father's side. Then the double doors at the back of the hall opened, and the evening turned. A household maid named Rosa hurried in with a face the color of old flour, trailed by 2 of Lorenzo's men who clearly had not wanted to let her through, but had lost the argument. In her trembling hands she carried a small glass vial, stoppered with cork, and beneath it, a library-bound volume whose gold foil spine read, "A Practical Encyclopedia of Botanical Toxins." A slip of paper marked a page. Anyone in that room could guess which page without being told. "Crime boss Castellano," Rosa whispered, curtsying badly. "I'm sorry I was turning down the little Miss's bed." This was in the drawer of her dollhouse. The book was under her pillow. The silence that dropped over the table was the silence of men who have just watched a gun be placed on a negotiating surface. Crime boss Romano set down his glass with a care that said, "I am not choosing sides tonight." Dr. Harold Whitmore, the family physician, materialized from a side corridor with his leather case already open far too quickly for a man who was supposedly enjoying the cigar lounge. He took the vial, sniffed, dipped a reagent strip into what remained on the rim of Lorenzo's untouched flute, then into Adriana's empty one. Both strips stayed pale. He murmured a string of Latin and English that amounted to nothing poisonous, nothing at all, and the table exhaled in a single collective breath. Adriana's eyes filled, measured, cinematic, one tear permitted to fall before she gathered Sophia into her arms with a tenderness that made the Romano wives reach for their napkins. "Oh, my sweet girl," she breathed against Sophia's hair. "You've been reading too many of Mommy's detective novels again. Haven't I told you the stories aren't real?" She looked up at the table with a shimmering, forgiving smile. "Gentlemen, forgive her. She lost so much, so young. Sometimes she invents." Near the far end of the table, Captain Enzo Romano leaned toward Tommy Vitali and lowered his voice to the register reserved for funerals and bad debts. "A crime boss's daughter, spinning a story like this one at a peace table," he murmured. "With respect, Tommaso, this is not good for the face of your house." Tommy did not answer. Tommy was watching Lorenzo. Lorenzo had not moved. His spine was straight, his expression composed into the particular smoothness his enemies had learned to fear more than shouting. Inside the cage of that stillness, something older than strategy was breaking. 5 times in 6 months. The ring, the beagle's bleeding paw, the slashed oil portrait, the invented poisoning in the tea 3 months back, the threatening letter in a child's scrawl, and now this in front of the Romanos, in front of every man whose loyalty depended on believing the Castellano bloodline was sound. He rose. He lifted Sophia carefully from Adriana's arms without looking at his wife. He carried his daughter the length of that dining hall, past 11 pairs of watching eyes, up the grand staircase, and into her bedroom on the 3rd floor. He set her on the edge of the canopied bed. He did not speak. He did not look at her face. He closed the door. The bolt slid into place from the outside with a small, final click. Lorenzo walked the length of the east corridor without hearing his own footsteps. He passed the study where his father had been shot, passed the door to the chapel his mother had built after that, and entered his private office at the end of the hall. He locked it. He did not turn on the overhead light. He sat at the desk in the blue wash of the harbor moon coming through the window, and for the first time since Adriana had come back to him 2 years ago, he allowed himself to count. The engagement ring had been the first. 6 months back, Adriana had come down to breakfast in tears, her hand bare, and Lorenzo had torn apart the house looking for it. Sophia's school backpack, zipped into the inner pocket, wrapped in a tissue, as if a child had hidden a stolen chocolate. Sophia had sworn she had never touched the ring. Adriana had kissed the top of her head and told him privately that night. "She's still adjusting to me, Ren. Give her time." She watched her mother die. The second had been Duchess, the old beagle his father had raised, the one Sophia used to read books to on the sun porch rug. A gash across the front paw, stitched by Dr. Whitmore in the kitchen, a pair of sewing scissors on the grass. A gardener who swore he had seen the little girl running back toward the house with something shining in her hand. Sophia had said she found Duchess already bleeding. Adriana had wept and said the child must have panicked, must have tried to help and made it worse. "She's jealous of anything I love, Ren. Even the dog comes to me now." The third had bitten deeper. Adriana's oil portrait, the one commissioned for her 30th birthday, the one Lorenzo had sat beside her for, hand on her shoulder, while a painter in Florence rendered her mouth stroke by stroke slashed from corner to corner. Sophia had been found in the gallery with cadmium red under her fingernails. She had said she had only touched the paint, not the canvas. Adriana had knelt beside her and held her, and begged Lorenzo not to punish the child. "She's afraid I'm replacing her mother. In her mind, the painting is the enemy." The fourth had been the tea, 3 months ago. Sophia, white-faced at the breakfast table, knocking the porcelain cup out of Lorenzo's hand and begging him not to drink. Whitmore's reagent strips had stayed blank then, too. Adriana had spoken gently of grief and of dreams that feel real to children who have lost too much. A family therapist had been mentioned for the first time. Lorenzo had said no. He regretted saying no now, and then hated himself for regretting it. The fifth only weeks ago had been the letter. A single page on Castellano stationery delivered to an associate in Queens, threatening his children in looping pencil letters that could only have come from a small hand. Sophia had sobbed that she had not written it, that she did not even know the man's name. Adriana had held her while she sobbed. Jealousy, Ren. She cannot bear that I am in her house. Always Adriana defending her. Always Adriana explaining her. Always Adriana, the wronged stepmother performing mercy in front of him. Lorenzo's head went down onto the cool wood of the desk, and in the dark, a memory surfaced that he had not let himself touch in 2 years. Adriana, the first Adriana, the one he had kissed goodbye on a Tuesday morning before the car left the coast road and vanished over a cliff, gripping his wrist at the hospital birth of their daughter, drenched in sweat, fierce-eyed. Promise me, Ren, whatever happens. When she talks about me, she is always right. He had promised. He had forgotten. The memory came to him now half erased, as if someone had been walking through his mind these past 2 years with a soft cloth, wiping. 2 floors above the office where her father sat with his head on the desk, Sophia Castellano knelt on the rug of her bedroom in the pale blue nightgown she had been changed into by a maid who would not meet her eyes. She had heard the bolt. She had heard the footsteps go away. She had not cried. She had learned, the way small animals learn near a trap. That sound brought a woman to the door, and the woman was not safe. The room around her was a little girl's idea of a palace, a canopied bed in cream silk, a glass dome of preserved butterflies on the dresser, a dollhouse with working brass hinges, shelves of books in 3 languages, a bay window facing the dark Atlantic. None of it belonged to her exactly. The only thing in the room that belonged to Sophia truly belonged, the way skin belongs to a body, was the large brown teddy bear slumped in the reading chair by the window. Mr. Puddles, worn ears, one glass eye looser than the other, a stitched seam along his back, hidden under the fur, that her mother had sewn shut with double thread. Sophia crossed to him on her knees. She slipped her fingers into the seam, past the cotton stuffing, and drew out a small black leather notebook no bigger than her hand. She held it the way other children hold rosaries. The notebook had begun the summer she turned 4, when her mother, her real mother, the Adriana with the small scar over the left eyebrow from a childhood fall, the Adriana who could not smell oranges without sneezing, had bought it at a stationer in the West Village and said, "This is ours, little star. Whatever you draw, I'll write the story for it. Whatever I promise you, I'll put a star next to it, so we remember." Page by page over 3 years they had filled it together. A drawing of a whale with a crown, the king of the cold water. We'll visit him in Maine someday. A drawing of a Ferris wheel. Your birthday when you turn 8. A drawing of a house painted red and white in stripes, with a single beam of light over a dark sea, where the stars land. That one had 3 stars, because her mother had said it was the most important place in the world, and that one day Sophia would understand why. The last pages were in Sophia's handwriting alone. Small, careful, with the spelling of a 7-year-old doing her best. Dates in the corner, things she had seen that no one believed. She had hidden the book inside Mr. Puddles the week the new Adriana came home, because by then Sophia had already understood. The woman who had walked through the front door wearing her mother's pearls and her mother's smile had looked at Mr. Puddles and said, "Oh, you still have that old thing?" Her real mother had never called him that old thing. Her real mother had called him by his name. And the woman, whoever she was, had been going through Sophia's drawers at night. Sophia had found the dollhouse furniture moved, a sock turned inside out, a corner of her rug lifted. Never Mr. Puddles, though. The woman's hands had not yet touched Mr. Puddles. A soft tap at the door. 3 knocks, a pause, 1 knock, the signal. "Little love?" came the whisper from the other side. "It's only me, Mrs." Margaret O'Brien had been housekeeper at the Castellano estate for 20 years. Irish from a village outside Galway, 62 years old, broad hands and gray hair pinned up, she had helped bathe Lorenzo's own mother in her last illness. She had a key the master of the house did not know she had kept. She turned it now, quietly, and came in with a silver tray, a bowl of tomato soup, and a warm slice of buttered soda bread she had baked herself. She set the tray on the writing desk. She sat on the edge of the bed. Sophia climbed into her lap without a word, and pressed her cheek into the starched apron that smelled of lavender and flour. "Margaret," Sophia whispered into the apron, "that isn't Mommy. Mommy came home, but that isn't Mommy." Mrs. O'Brien's hand went still on the child's hair. For a long moment she only stroked, the way one strokes a hurt animal. Then she kissed the top of Sophia's head. "Oh, my little love," she murmured, and her voice was the voice of a woman who had watched too many children grieve. "Missing her that much, sometimes it plays tricks on us. It's all right. It's all right." Sophia did not argue. She had learned that too. After Mrs. O'Brien left, she took the black notebook to the window. She turned to a blank page. She drew two women the same face, the same dark hair standing side by side. On one, she drew a string of pearls. On the other, a small pendant shaped like a 5-pointed star. Around the second woman she drew a careful circle. Underneath, in her neatest letters, the real mummy. The Romanos left at 11:30, kissed on both cheeks, walked to their armored cars with assurances of brotherhood that would last precisely as long as the wine in their veins. Lorenzo stood on the portico until the taillights vanished down the drive. Then he returned to his office, sat in the dark once more, and did not rise when the knock came at the door an hour later. Adriana entered without waiting for an answer. She had changed out of the dove-gray silk into a cashmere robe the color of milk, and she carried 2 cut crystal glasses and a bottle of the Japanese whiskey he had been saving for an anniversary. She crossed the rug without making a sound in her bare feet and set the glasses on the desk beside his hand. "You haven't spoken since dinner," she said softly. She poured. "Drink with me, Ren, please." He drank. He watched her pour her own and drink it down, too evenly, without theater. She circled behind the chair, slid her palms under the collar of his jacket, and began to knead the granite of his shoulders with the exact pressure she had always used. 10 years of muscle memory answered her hands before his mind did. His eyes closed for a moment in spite of himself. "My love," she murmured above his head, "we can't keep doing this. She could have ruined the Romano treaty tonight. She could have cost us the port deal, the warehouses, everything your father built." And next time her voice thickened, exactly the right amount. Next time she might do it to someone else's child, a schoolmate, a teacher. "I can't keep pretending this is normal." Lorenzo did not open his eyes. "What are you asking me, Doctor?" "Patricia Lane," Adriana said, and the name arrived smoothly, as if it had been waiting on her tongue for days. "She's on Park Avenue. She works with children of families like ours. Discreet. Never a note, never a file that leaves the office. I've been reading, Ren. Trauma from losing a mother at that age doesn't look like sadness. It looks like displaced hostility. It looks like a child trying to destroy whoever tries to take the mother's place." Her hands paused at the base of his neck. "I have loved her, Ren. I swear to you on my own life, I have tried to love her, and she hates me for it." He opened his eyes. He looked at the empty whiskey glass. He said without turning, "Discreet. No records. No facility. She sees the child here, or at a private office. No one else in the building that day. Of course. And she tells me directly. Not you first. Me." A half-second pause. "Of course, my love. Of course." She lifted her phone from the pocket of the robe and dialed, right there, on speaker, standing behind him with one hand still resting on his shoulder. A warm professional voice answered on the third ring. "Lane residence." Adriana apologized for the hour, explained the family, used Lorenzo's name without flinching, arranged a Thursday visit at the estate. Her tone was the tone of any desperate stepmother on any Upper East Side evening. It was flawless. It was, in fact, too flawless. But Lorenzo tonight did not have the strength left to hear it. He stood. He kissed the top of her head in the absent way of a man whose marriage had stopped being a place and become a duty. He said goodnight. He walked down the corridor to the guest room he had been sleeping in for 4 months, and he shut the door. Adriana stayed in the office. She waited until his footsteps had faded past the chapel. She waited a full minute more. Then she crossed to the oil landscape of Sag Harbor that hung above the fireplace, lifted it off its hook, and pressed a flat thumb into a seam in the paneling behind it. A narrow compartment slid open. Inside lay a second phone, smaller, matte, unmarked, the kind that did not take ordinary calls. She powered it on. Her face, under the blue screen light, lost the softness it had worn in front of her husband. The mouth went thin, the eyes went flat. She typed with the efficiency of someone who had been typing messages like this for a very long time. The glass trap worked. She's isolated. The old doctor is scheduled. Phase 3 begins. She pressed send. Somewhere a place neither Lorenzo nor Sophia nor Mrs. O'Brien yet had any idea existed. A man received those 8 words and smiled at the dark. Adriana put the phone back into its compartment, rehung the painting, straightened the frame until it was exactly level, and went upstairs to bed. Morning came slow and silver to Sag Harbor, fog moving off the water in slow sheets that made the windows of the breakfast room look underwater. Lorenzo had left for Brooklyn before 6. Sophia was still asleep, or pretending to be. Adriana came down alone at 8:15, in a pale cream robe, and seated herself at the head of the long table where Lorenzo normally sat. Mrs. O'Brien brought the coffee herself. She had not slept well. She set the silver pot down and began to pour, and in that ordinary act she let her eyes rest, for the first time in a long time, on the woman she had served for 10 years. Adriana was cutting into her eggs Benedict with the knife in her left hand. Mrs. O'Brien's wrist did not tremble immediately. That was the training of 40 years in service. The tremble came 3 seconds later, a small betrayal that sent a splash of coffee over the saucer's rim. She murmured an apology and mopped it with a linen napkin, but inside her chest something had stopped moving, then started again at a different speed. Adriana Bellini Castellano had been right-handed, aggressively so. Mrs. O'Brien knew this the way she knew the layout of the silver drawer. She had watched Adriana sign Christmas cards, knead pasta dough at this very table, brush her daughter's hair in the conservatory, every one of those motions with the right hand. More than that, in February of 2019, on a ski trip to Stowe, Adriana had fallen and snapped the thumb of her right hand so cleanly that Dr. Whitmore had put her in a splint for 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, Mrs. O'Brien had cut her meat for her, buttoned her blouses, twisted open her pill bottles. She remembered the small complaint Adriana had made every single morning of that recovery. I never realized how useless I was with the left. This woman, across the table, was using the left hand as if it were the only hand she had ever owned. Margaret, dear Adriana looked up and smiled, a perfect soft smile. Could you bring the orange marmalade? I've a terrible craving this morning. Mrs. O'Brien's mouth opened and did not make a sound. Orange. Marmalade. The first Mrs. Castellano had been violently allergic to citrus since childhood. One slice of orange on a salad at a Venice hotel in 2016 had put her in an emergency room for 2 nights. Lorenzo had banished oranges from the estate entirely after that. The kitchen had not stocked citrus marmalade in nearly a decade. Of course, ma'am, Mrs. O'Brien heard herself say. Right away. She walked to the pantry on legs that felt borrowed. She stood between the rows of tinned goods with her hand over her mouth. She found a jar of apricot preserves, brought it out, and said softly that the orange had finished, and a new case was on order. Adriana smiled again. Adriana spread apricot on her toast as if apricot had always been the plan. An hour later, when Adriana had gone up to dress for a Hampton's lunch, Mrs. O'Brien stood at the base of the servants' staircase and softly called Sophia's name. The child came down barefoot, Mr. Puddles tucked under one arm. In the warm yellow light of the kitchen, beside the stove where she had cooked for this family since the child's father was a teenager, Mrs. O'Brien knelt and cupped Sophia's small face in her hands. Little love, she whispered. Last night you told me it isn't your mommy. I want you to tell me now, slowly, how you know. Not because I think you're silly, because I think you might be right. Sophia's eyes filled so fast the tears did not even fall, they just sat there, held. She slid the black notebook out of Mr. Puddles. She turned to a middle page. Mommy sings Star Light, Star Bright, when the storm is loud. She sang it every storm. This one doesn't know it. Another page. Mommy knows where the stars land. This one doesn't know what that means. I asked her. She said I was being silly. One more page. And here the child's voice cracked. And Mommy named my bear. She gave him his name the day I was born. This one called him that old thing. Mrs. O'Brien read each drawing, each careful note. She breathed out once, a long, slow breath, like a woman setting down a weight she had been pretending was not there. She kissed Sophia's forehead. She went to the servants' hall. She shut the door. She took out her phone and dialed her son Declan, a sergeant at the 6th Precinct in Manhattan, and kept her voice very level. Dec, love, Mum needs a favor. Quiet one. I need you to pull anything you can on a family called Bellini Adriana Bellini's people, out of North Jersey. Twin sister especially. A twin sister named Celeste. The Castellano office in Brooklyn was not an office the way ordinary men use the word. It occupied the upper 3 floors of an anonymous brick building off Flushing Avenue, above a bakery the family had owned since 1941. The windows were tempered against rifle rounds. The back stairwell opened onto 3 separate alleyways and a rooftop bridge to the neighboring warehouse. The men who worked there did not use surnames on the phone. Lorenzo arrived at 9. He took the elevator to the top floor, where Tommaso Vitale was already waiting in the war room with 4 captains, a pot of coffee going cold, and a map of the eastern seaboard pinned with red thumbtacks in 7 places it should not have been pinned. Tell me, Lorenzo said, and sat down without taking off his overcoat. Tommy did not soften it. Tommy had never softened anything for him, which was why Tommy was still alive. "DeLuca money is moving again, Ren." The room did not breathe for a second. The DeLuca name had not been spoken aloud in this building in 15 years. The DeLucas had been a family once, cousins by marriage to the Castellanos, until the night a man named Marcus DeLuca walked Lorenzo's father into an ambush on a pier in Red Hook and watched him bleed out between two shipping containers. Lorenzo had been 22. What he had crime boss after that to the DeLuca name and bloodline was not a story the captains at this table told in front of women. There were no DeLucas left. There had not been, for a decade and a half. And yet, Tommy slid a folder across the table. Shell companies out of Luxembourg feeding money into a Staten Island scrap metal firm. The same firm quietly buying waterfront leases near 2 of the Castellano drop points. A Cypriot trust registering minority stakes in 4 restaurants Lorenzo used as legitimate fronts. Sums too neat to be coincidence. Patterns too old to be anyone's but Marcus DeLuca's own hand, or the hand of someone who had been taught by him. "And there's something else," Tommy said quietly. "Coffee in a small paper cup, untouched. Our shipping schedule for the March runs the Norfolk route. Somebody had it before we sent it to the cruise. The interception attempt last Tuesday wasn't random. They knew the window to the minute." Lorenzo's jaw set. "Who had that schedule?" Tommy leaned forward on his elbows. He looked his crime boss in the eye the way an advisor is paid to do, even when the crime boss may not wish to be looked at. "You, me, Silas Hartwell, because the freight insurance writer went through him. Dr. Whitmore, because the medic on the Norfolk boat needed a prescription renewed and he was CC'd on the manifest by mistake." And Tommy hesitated one breath too long. "Adriana, because she was in your office when you printed it last Wednesday, and she asked what it was, and you told her." The room went very still. Lorenzo's eyes moved, just once, over his own captains. He saw them watching him wait for the name to be crossed off. "Not Adriana," Lorenzo said. "Flat. Final. Look elsewhere." Tommy held his crime boss's gaze for 2 heartbeats. 2 heartbeats too many, then dropped his eyes and nodded. "Understood, boss." The other captains understood too. They understood the way men understood when an order had been given that did not match the evidence on the table. They understood, and they said nothing. And they began to speak instead of Silas Hartwell's Tuesday meetings and Dr. Whitmore's gambling debts upstate. Tommy ran the rest of the meeting with his usual efficiency. Only the pen in his right hand, tapping once and then again against the manila folder, gave away that the advisor did not agree with the exclusion he had just been told to accept. At 11:45, Lorenzo stood. He walked to the stairwell alone, which he almost never did. He needed the air. He needed the 3 flights down past his father's photograph on the 2nd-floor landing. On the stairs, his phone buzzed. An unfamiliar Manhattan number. "Mr. Castellano, this is Headmistress Larkin at St. Ursula's. We're calling as a courtesy. Sophia has been absent 3 days this week. Your wife phoned yesterday and said she was running a small fever, but we wanted to check in directly, since we haven't had a doctor's note and Mr. Castellano. Are you there? 3 days. Sophia had not been sick. Sophia had come down to breakfast 2 of those mornings. Sophia had been bolted into her room last night after the Romano dinner, and no one had told Lorenzo a word about her missing school. He thanked the headmistress. He ended the call. He stood on the landing with one hand on the rail and the cold of the iron biting through his glove, and for the first time in 2 years, a single grain of sand slipped into the smooth machinery of his trust in the woman who slept in his bed. Adriana left the estate at 11:10 the next morning, dressed in white linen, carrying a quilted tote for the spa at Gurney's in Montauk. The black town car rolled down the drive with 2 of Lorenzo's men in front, and a standing appointment card for 6 treatment hours on the seat beside her. She would not be back before 7. Mrs. O'Brien watched the car clear the gate from the window of the 2nd-floor linen closet. She waited a further 8 minutes, twice as long as her own heart wanted her to wait, and then she walked the east corridor to the master bedroom with a feather duster in her hand and the cleaning code already prepared in her head, should anyone ask. No one asked. The house staff that morning was thin, 2 gardeners on the south lawn, the cook downstairs preparing a chilled bisque, a single maid in the children's wing. Sophia was at the library with a tutor under the eye of the new nanny. The master bedroom stood empty in the flat sea light. Mrs. O'Brien shut the door behind her. She did not lock it. A locked door from the inside was the kind of detail cameras remembered. She went straight to the dressing table. The jewelry box was a carved walnut thing Lorenzo had commissioned in Milan for his wife's 30th. 3 drawers, velvet linings, a small brass key usually tucked behind a perfume bottle, where Mrs. O'Brien had seen Adriana reach for it 100 times. She reached for it now, The top drawer held earrings, pins, a string of freshwater pearls. The second held bracelets laid in a row. In the back corner of the second, nested on a folded square of jeweler's tissue, lay the wedding band. She lifted it under the window. The gold was worn smooth along the inner edge from 10 years of a woman's hand. Inside the band, in the small engraved script, Mrs. O'Brien had stood witness to at the jeweler on Madison the week before the ceremony. The line read, A+L Sag Harbor, 2015. This was the ring. This was the true ring. Mrs. O'Brien had watched Adriana pull it off her swollen finger the night she went into labor and slip it onto her own pinky so she would not lose it in the delivery. Mrs. O'Brien set it down. She opened the hidden compartment at the back of the second drawer, the one she had seen Adriana use for her mother's rosary, and she found, sitting beside the rosary, a second ring. Identical. Almost. The gold was a shade warmer, the way new gold is before a decade of skin wears it softer. The engraving inside was the same line, but the script was cleaner, newer, cut with a machine that had not been the jeweler on Madison. A copy. A good copy. A copy meant to be worn in public by a hand that had never stood at that altar. She picked up her phone with fingers that had begun to tremble again and photographed both rings, side by side, in the window light. The bottom drawer was where the breath left her entirely. Under a folded silk scarf lay a passport. Expired. The burgundy cover of the United States of America. She opened it. The photograph inside was the face of the woman who had just driven away to the spa, the same mouth, the same cheekbones, the same small mole below the left ear. The name printed beside the photograph was not Adriana Castellano, Celeste Maria Bellini. Date of birth. The same date of birth she had served cake to for 10 birthdays. Beneath the passport lay a photograph album, small, cloth-bound, the pages yellowed at the edges. 1990-something, Jersey Shore, a backyard in summer. 2 little girls, perhaps 6 years old, in matching sundresses with matching bows in their dark hair, standing in front of a plastic pool. One of them grinned with her whole face. The other stood a half step behind and did not smile. Mrs. O'Brien photographed the album. She photographed the passport. She photographed the second ring from 3 angles. Then she heard the tires on the gravel. It was too early. It was impossibly too early, not yet 12:30. But she knew the particular sound of that town car's wheels against the drive, and the particular rhythm at which the driver took the bend at the rose arbor, and she knew she had exactly 40 seconds. She put the rosary back. She closed the hidden compartment. She slid the passport and the album into their places. She closed each drawer. She locked the jewelry box. She returned the brass key behind the perfume bottle, correcting the angle until it matched her memory of the angle it had been at. She crossed the room. She ran the feather duster once along the dresser, because a duster held for 5 minutes without use left a sweating palm print on the handle. She stepped out into the corridor. She pulled the door softly to, and was 3 paces along the runner when the front doors opened 2 floors below. By the time Adriana came up the grand staircase in her white linen, a cold, flat smile already waiting, Mrs. O'Brien was coming out of the hall bath with a stack of fresh towels in her arms. "Margaret," the voice said from the top of the stairs, and the voice was no longer the gentle voice of breakfast. "You've been cleaning upstairs, have you, Mrs.?" O'Brien bowed her head and kept her face composed as she passed. She said, "Yes, ma'am, just the linens." She walked to the servants' staircase. She made it to the kitchen before her knees gave. She sat at the baker's table, photos still on her phone, and understood with the full weight of her 62 years that she had almost certainly been seen. The call came at 7 in the morning. Lorenzo was in the guest wing bathroom with a razor at his jaw when Adriana's voice reached him through the door, not hysterical, but cracked in exactly the way a wounded wife's voice cracks, which was the most dangerous sound in that house. "Ren, come upstairs, please." He found her in the master bedroom in a silk robe, kneeling on the rug beside her jewelry box with one hand over her mouth. The box stood open. The second drawer, the one with the bracelets, had been turned upside down onto the carpet. She did not look up when he came in. She only pointed, without speaking, at a small black velvet pouch drawn tight with a gold cord. "This was in Margaret's room," she whispered. "The cook found it when she went to borrow her iron." Lorenzo loosened the cord. Inside was the diamond Riviere he had given Adriana on their 5th anniversary, 4 strands of brilliants set in platinum, a piece insured for a figure that would have bought the bakery downstairs outright. It had been locked in this drawer 2 nights ago. He had seen her put it there himself. "I crime boss'd understand," Adriana breathed. The single tear was already on her cheek. measured and unhurried. I trusted her. I trusted her like a mother, Ren. With our daughter. With everything. Why Lorenzo did not answer. He walked to his office, sat at his desk, and pulled up the house security feed on his laptop. The estate recorded every corridor, every entrance. He scrolled to the previous day, and the timestamp of 12 past 12, and watched, in flat black and white, a figure in a Navy housekeeper's apron open the master bedroom door, cross to the dressing table, and let herself out 70 seconds later. The resolution was sharp enough to read the wristwatch on the wrist. Margaret O'Brien's old brass Timex, the one her son had given her for her 50th. He did not see the part of the morning where the same footage had been trimmed to remove the way her hands had rested, tense and photographing, on the jewelry box itself. He did not see the 9 minutes that had been stitched out. He did not see any of the pieces that had been lifted from the record by someone who knew the system's architecture very well. What Lorenzo saw was the housekeeper who had helped raise his daughter opening a drawer she had no business opening, and leaving. He closed the laptop. He did not shout. He did not curse. Men in his line of work who shouted at the wrong moment were men who did not live long. He simply went downstairs, into the kitchen where Mrs. O'Brien was already on her feet beside the stove with her own apron in her hands, and he said, very quietly, "Margaret, I want you out of this house in 2 hours. Crime boss'd make me send anyone to escort you." Her mouth opened. "Mr. Castellano, 2 hours." She did not beg. She had worked for Castellanos long enough to know when begging only made the hour shorter. She went upstairs. She packed one suitcase and a hat box. She came back down and stood in the front hall with her coat over her arm, waiting for the cab she had called herself. Sophia came down the staircase in her school pinafore with Mr. Puddles under her arm. Mrs. O'Brien Kelt. She put both hands around the child's small fingers. She whispered into Sophia's ear in a voice nobody else could hear. "Sweetheart, listen to me. When you get back to your room, look at the fridge magnet I left there, the one shaped like a shamrock. Take it off. Turn it over. There's a telephone number written on the back. Remember the name on it. Elena. If you are ever alone and afraid, Sophia, you call that number. Do you understand me? Elena." Sophia nodded once. Her lower lip trembled but did not give. Mrs. O'Brien kissed her forehead, stood, and did not look back as she stepped into the cab. Upstairs, Sophia climbed onto the kitchen counter without anyone seeing, pulled the shamrock magnet off the refrigerator door, and carried it up to her bedroom. She slit the seam of Mr. Puddles open with a butter knife and slid the magnet inside, beside the notebook. In the back of the cab, rolling down the coast road, Mrs. O'Brien waited until the estate gate had vanished behind a curve of hedges. She dialed a number that had not been used in 4 years. "Elena? It's Margaret O'Brien. Something is terribly wrong in the Castellano house. That child has never been lying. Not once." The next morning at 7, a woman neither Lorenzo nor Sophia had ever seen stepped out of a black sedan at the front steps with a single suitcase and an unsmiling face. Pale, in her 40s, dark hair pulled tight. A trace of Eastern Europe in the 2 words she offered the maid at the door. "Nadia Kolev, the new nanny. I am expected." Nadia Kolev did not read bedtime stories. Nadia Kolev did not turn on the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon that had glowed on Sophia's ceiling for 4 years. Nadia Kolev slid the bolt on the outside of the bedroom door at 8 o'clock each evening. Lorenzo had instructed that Sophia stay confined after the Romano dinner, for her safety, and then sat in the corridor on a straight-backed chair with a paperback in Russian and a cup of black tea that never seemed to empty. By midnight, the corridor chair was empty. Sophia listened for the sound of Nadia's footsteps going down the back stairs to her own room. She listened for the soft hush of the radiator coming on. She counted to 300, the way her mother had once taught her to count when she was afraid of the dark. Then she got out of bed, pulled a wool cardigan over her nightgown, and went to the window. The estate's 3rd floor had been built in 1912, with a shallow copper gutter that ran along the east face above the conservatory roof. Sophia had discovered it the summer she turned 5, chasing a balloon. The balloon had been lost. The route had not. She had walked it a dozen times in the 2 years since, always when her real mother was alive, always as a game. Tonight it was not a game. Tonight she slid the sash up, slipped onto the cold copper, and padded barefoot along the ledge with Mr. Puddles pressed flat against her chest. The conservatory sat on the south corner of the house, a glass pavilion full of orange trees and white wrought-iron benches, where Lorenzo's mother had once grown jasmine. Light was on inside, not bright, one lamp, yellow, near the benches. Sophia crouched behind the brick planter of climbing roses that rose to the second-story gutter and looked down through the skylight glass. Adriana, no. The woman was walking the length of the pavilion with a phone pressed to her ear. Her bare feet left no sound on the flagstones. She wore the cream silk robe, but the cream silk robe was not what arrested the child. The voice was wrong. It was not Mommy's voice. It was not even the voice Adriana used in this house. It was lower, flatter, and under the careful English there was a curl of something the same pinch at the back of the vowels that Nadia Kolev had used at the breakfast table. A trace of somewhere else. Somewhere east. Sophia did not breathe. The child keeps a diary somewhere, the woman was saying. I have searched the room 3 times. She hides it. Marcus, she is smarter than we thought. The old woman is gone. Yes. The husband is crumbling. He did not sleep last night. I heard him in the study. He is halfway to the breaking point. But the girl, Marcus, listen, the girl has to come out of the picture before she remembers the lighthouse. Do you understand me? Before she remembers. A pause. A man's voice answered on the other end, too faint through the glass to be made out, only the rhythm of someone speaking firmly. I am aware of what is at stake, the woman said. That is why I am telling you. She is 7, Marcus. She was 4 the last time she was there. But she was there with her. Children remember. Do not test me on this. Another pause, then softer, almost dismissive. 2 more weeks. The doctor's assessment, then the facility. After that, it will not matter what she remembers. Sophia's lips shaped 2 words without sound. Marcus. Lighthouse. She did not know what either meant. She locked them inside her head the way she had learned to lock things inside her head. She crept back along the copper. She slid through the sash. She closed the window. She crossed the rug to Mr. Puddles, pulled the notebook out of the slit seam, and turned to a blank page. Beside a small drawing of a 5-pointed star, she printed in careful capital letters, Lighthouse, the woman said it. Marcus. A man on the phone. She slept with the notebook inside the bear and both arms around the bear. At 6:30 the next morning, before the house had woken, she went to the kitchen on soft feet and took the shamrock magnet from where she had hidden it inside Mr. Puddles. On the back, in Mrs. O'Brien's slanted nurse school handwriting, was a 10-digit number and a single name, Elena. She needed a phone. She waited until 7, when the gardeners came on shift, and she walked down through the kitchen garden in her coat as if she were only going to feed the koi. Miguel Ramirez was 19, new, from Queens, the only one on the grounds crew who still said good morning, missed the way a person said it to a person. He was pruning roses near the south wall. Sophia approached with large, careful eyes. Miguel, please, may I borrow your phone? Just for 1 minute. I want to call my friend from school. Nadia took mine and she won't give it back. Miguel glanced toward the house, hesitated, and then, because he was 19, and because the little girl's eyes had gone very wet, handed her his phone. Sophia walked 3 steps behind a hedge. She dialed. A woman answered on the second ring. Not sleepy. Alert. Vasquez. Sophia's voice came out smaller than she meant. Are you the lady Mrs. O'Brien knows? She said you help people. I'm Sophia Castellano, and I think my mommy isn't my mommy. On the other end, a long breath. Then, very gently, Sophia, listen to me. I am putting on my coat right now. Tell me everything. Elena Vasquez had told her, on the phone behind the hedge, to stay small, stay quiet, do nothing that drew the woman's attention, and wait. 2 days at most, sweetheart. I need to move some pieces first. Can you hold on 2 days? Sophia had said yes. Sophia was 7. And the lighthouse woman had told a man named Marcus that there were 2 weeks. And Sophia did not know what assessment meant, but she knew what facility meant, because her great-aunt Rosaria had been sent to one in Westchester and had not come back. 2 weeks was less than forever. 2 days was a very long time inside 2 weeks. Sophia decided, by herself, in the bay window of her bedroom on Tuesday afternoon, that she could not only wait, she would go around the woman, she would go to her father. She had tried, once, in whispers in the hallway after the tea incident. He had put a hand on her shoulder and moved her gently aside. She understood now that whispers were not enough. The woman was in the whispers. The woman owned his ears during the day. But paper was something Lorenzo read alone, at his desk, late at night, with the door locked. Paper could not be interrupted. She took the black notebook from Mr. Puddles. For the first time since the book had been given to her, she tore out pages carefully, one at a time, along the binding, because a thing this sacred deserved neat edges. She chose 4. The first was the drawing she had made the night Mrs. O'Brien still believed her 2 women with the same face, one with pearls, one with the 5-pointed star. She added arrows now in red pencil, small labels in her neatest cursive. Mommy had a little freckle by her eye. This one doesn't. Mommy wrote with her right hand. This one uses her left. Mommy's voice was softer when she said my name. This one says it the same way she says everything. The second was the page for starlight, star bright. She drew a storm, a child hiding under a quilt, a woman's shape by the bed, and printed above it. Mommy sang this every thunder, every single one. The new one doesn't know the words. I tested her. I asked her to sing it when the big storm came in October. She said she had a sore throat. The third was the page that said where the stars land, with the red and white striped house on the cliff. Underneath, in pencil so careful it must have taken her 20 minutes. This is our place, Daddy. Mommy said we'd go there when I was big enough. The new one doesn't know where it is. I asked her. She laughed and said it was a made-up story. The 4th page was the newest, with the 2 words she had captured through the glass of the conservatory last night. Lighthouse. Marcus. The new one said these on the phone in the green room at 1 a.m. to a man. She said, I have to go away before I remember. She folded the 4 pages together. She wrote on the outside, in letters so large a tired man at a desk would have to see them, Daddy, please, read this alone. At 2:30, Lorenzo left the estate for a meeting at the plaza. Sophia slipped into his office behind a housekeeper, carrying fresh towels, and tucked the folded pages into the middle of a manila folder of shipping records on his blotter, where he would open it the moment he sat down. Lorenzo returned at 9:15. He sat. He opened the folder. His first reaction was a low, cold anger. He pinched the bridge of his nose. Now, he thought, she has the gall to put it on paper, with stage directions, as if I am the child. He almost swept it into the waste bin. Then his eye caught the drawing of the storm, and the child and the woman. Starlight, star bright. And something in his chest opened up into a room he had not walked into for 7 years. A hospital corridor. 3 a.m. Adriana, his Adriana, drenched in sweat, the baby a pink wet weight on her chest, and her voice cracked, exhausted, radiant, singing into the soft dark hair of the newborn. Starlight, star bright. The first star I see tonight. He had stood in the doorway with tears he did not let fall, because men in his family did not let them fall, and he had thought, this is the song she will sing my daughter forever. Had she sung it? He searched his memory for the last 2 years of October storms, nights when Sag Harbor had shaken with thunder. The woman who slept in his bed had not gone up to the child's room on a single one of those nights. Had she ever sung anything at all, in any room, where he had heard her? He could not remember. He could not remember. Lorenzo folded the 4 pages carefully. He did not throw them away. He did not confront. He rose, crossed to the painting over the fireplace, and stopped himself, because something told him not to test the painting tonight. Instead, he knelt at the floor safe beneath the desk, turned the combination, and laid the pages inside under a stack of old deeds. He closed it. He spun the dial. He climbed the stairs to the master bedroom for the first time in months, and slid into the bed beside his wife. She slept on her side, facing away. Moonlight came through the gauze curtains and lay across the curve of her neck. Lorenzo lay very still and looked at her, and in that silver light he saw, behind her left ear, a thin, pale line of scar tissue about the length of a fingernail. He had held that face in his hands for 10 years. He had kissed behind that ear more times than he could count. He had never, in 10 years, seen that scar. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep. The cafe on Court Street in Cobble Hill had wooden booths from the 1960s, windows fogged by espresso steam, and a back table that faced both entrances, which was precisely why Elena Vasquez had chosen it for the past 11 years, whenever she needed to listen to someone without being listened to in return. She was there at 7 a.m, 1 hour after Sophia Castellano's small voice had hung up a borrowed phone behind a hedge in Sag Harbor. She was there at 7:15 when Mrs. Margaret O'Brien came through the door in a camel coat and a gray woolen hat, and Elena stood up to hug her the way daughters hug mothers they have not held in 4 years. 44 years old, Elena. Prematurely gray at the temples, a souvenir, she sometimes said, of the 2 years she had spent under in Ciudad Juarez before the DEA pulled her out. Straight spine, reading glasses pushed up into her hair, 3 languages without an accent in any of them. She had left the agency in 2020 and opened a private security consultancy in Long Island City that did not have a sign on the door. She had also, in the fall of 2017, been the woman who pulled Lorenzo Castellano out of a warehouse in Red Hook, 30 seconds before a federal task force kicked the door in because she had recognized, on a wire she was not supposed to be listening to, that the task force had been fed a bad address by a corrupt supervisor who owed the DeLucas a favor from another life. Lorenzo had never been able to repay that. Elena had never asked. Mrs. O'Brien slid into the booth. She set her phone on the table without turning it on, which Elena noticed, and Elena liked. Tell me, Margaret. Start from the very first thing that felt wrong. Mrs. O'Brien started from the breakfast of the eggs Benedict cut with the wrong hand. She worked forward. She worked backward. She worked in circles, the way a mind does when it has been carrying a weight alone. When she turned her phone on, she walked Elena through each photograph, the ring with the true engraving, the copy with the newer cut, the Bellini passport, the cloth-bound album with two small girls in matching bows. Elena studied each one for a long time over a cup of coffee she did not drink. She pressed her thumb against the photograph of the younger twin, the half-step-back child, and held it there. I believed her, Elena said quietly, after a while. Sophia, on the phone yesterday, I wanted to tell you I already believed her before you walked in. I only had to know why. She opened the leather portfolio beside her and turned it so Mrs. O'Brien could see. I spent last night on a file I closed 11 years ago. Adriana Bellini, born Paterson, New Jersey, 1990. Twin sister, Celeste Maria Bellini. Same birthday. The Bellini parents moved the girls to Milan when they were 12 modeling work. Celeste was the one the agency wanted. Adriana came home at 19. Celeste stayed in Europe. Elena turned a page. In 2013, Celeste Bellini was listed as deceased in a hotel fire in Prague. Structural collapse, upper floors, bodies burned beyond visual identification. The Czech authorities closed the case on dental records, sent over by a private clinic that, when I ran it last night, has not existed since 2009. There was no DNA confirmation. There was no autopsy. The coffin flown home to Paterson was sealed. Mrs. O'Brien pressed both hands flat against the table. Sweet God in heaven, it gets worse. Celeste Bellini, before the fire, was being watched by Czech intelligence for a relationship with a man named Piotr Vavřinec, who ran stolen art laundering out of Prague and Budapest. Vavřinec's organization had, and this is where my hair stood up, Margaret, a documented business relationship, in 2010 and 11, with a North American financier who was processing money for the DeLuca family of New York. Mrs. O'Brien went very still. DeLuca, that name, that's the name the child heard. Marcus. Elena nodded once. Marcus DeLuca. Used to be a captain in the Castellano family, then an underboss, then the man who walked crime boss Castellano Sr. onto a pier in Red Hook in 2011 and watched him die. Lorenzo took him to a stretch of desert past Presidio, Texas, and by every account I have ever heard from every mouth in this city, put 2 bullets in him and left him for the coyotes. No body was ever recovered on the American side. No body was ever recovered on the Mexican side. For 15 years, every man in 5 boroughs has assumed that meant the desert took him. Maybe the desert did not take him. Mrs. O'Brien's voice came out in a whisper. You're saying Marcus DeLuca is alive. I'm saying it is possible. I'm saying that if Celeste Bellini faked her own death in Prague, and everything in this file now tells me she did, then somebody spent years teaching her to stand in for her twin sister. Somebody with a specific reason to want to be inside the Castellano house. Somebody with 15 years of patience and a score to settle. Those 2 things, Margaret Celeste and Marcus, are not separate stories. They are one story. Mrs. O'Brien was gripping the edge of the table hard enough that her knuckles had gone white. We have to tell Lorenzo. Today. Elena shook her head slowly. Not today. Today we have rings and passports, and a 90-year-old housekeeper's eyewitness. If I walk into that estate right now and tell that man his wife is her own dead sister and his oldest enemy is behind her, and I am wrong about 1% of it, he shoots the messenger and we lose the child. I need DNA. I need one more hard piece. Give me 72 hours, Margaret. Keep the girl alive for 72 hours, and I will put it in front of him in a way even he cannot refuse. Mrs. O'Brien closed her eyes and nodded. Elena reached across the table and held her hand the way a sister holds a sister, at a funeral that has not yet started. Celeste did not have 72 hours. Celeste had the instincts of a woman who had spent 12 years pretending to be another woman, and those instincts were telling her, by Wednesday afternoon, that the ground under her feet had begun to soften. The child had borrowed a phone from a gardener. One of Celeste's own observers on the grounds had seen the borrowing and reported it, not the number dialed, not the conversation, only the fact. Lorenzo had slept in the master bedroom Tuesday night for the first time in 4 months, which was not a reconciliation, which was surveillance, and the missing housekeeper, Celeste's contact in Brooklyn now confirmed, had met with a woman matching the description of a former federal agent at a cafe in Cobble Hill. The child had to come out of the picture, not in 2 weeks. This week, this afternoon. Celeste was, among her other qualities, patient and thorough. She planned it inside of 40 minutes. At 3 o'clock, the pool house was sent into a predictable small chaos. A plumbing leak in the upstairs maid's bathroom drew the day staff to the second floor with towels and pails. The chlorine delivery, which Celeste had personally rescheduled for that afternoon, was signed for by a new hand on the grounds crew, who did not yet know the correct dosage and who, helpfully, tipped the full contents of 2 industrial jugs into the heated infinity pool instead of the diluted measure. The nanny, Nadia, was dispatched to Southampton for a prescription pickup that Celeste had timed to take exactly 90 minutes, and Sophia was invited, with a sweet, soft voice through the bedroom door, to come down for a swim before her father returned. The child did not want to come. Celeste did not insist. She unlocked the door, left it open, and walked away. A 7-year-old locked in her room for 3 days, Celeste knew, would walk past an open door toward sunlight eventually. Sophia did, at 3:30, carrying her swim bag and Mr. Puddles. The pool house changing room had a heavy cedar door and a brass deadbolt. The deadbolt had been reversed, 3 months earlier, by a quiet locksmith Celeste had paid in cash, so that what looked, from the inside, like a thumb turn was now only decorative, and the true mechanism only turned from the corridor side. Sophia stepped in to change. The door closed behind her. The bolt slid. She pulled at the handle. She called once, then twice, then hammered. Through the cedar she heard a woman's voice. Celeste's, warm and theatrical, saying to someone unseen, "Oh, sweetheart, crime boss it do that. Come out and we'll talk," performing a concerned stepmother for whatever camera or witness mattered. Then the voice went away, and the house went silent, and the chlorine in the pool, whose vapor was already building in the enclosed pavilion, began to burn Sophia's eyes through the vents above the changing room door. Miguel Ramirez was pushing a wheelbarrow of mulch along the south path at 11 minutes to 4. He heard the sound of a child crying behind glass. He had heard that sound exactly once before in his life. His younger sister, in a closet, the night their apartment had caught fire in Corona. He dropped the wheelbarrow. He ran. The pool house door was locked. He kicked it twice before the frame gave. The air inside hit him like a wall of bleach. Sophia was on the tile floor of the changing room, pounding the lower panel of the door with both small fists, her lips already going blue around the edges. He wrapped her in a beach towel, ran her out to the lawn, sat her in the grass with her face in the fresh sea wind, and called Lorenzo's direct line, the one the gardeners were not supposed to have, but which Miguel had memorized the first week on the job, because his tia had told him always know how to reach the man who signs your check. Lorenzo was in a conference room at the plaza. He heard your daughter, crime boss Castellano, the pool, and he was on his feet before Miguel finished the sentence. The drive from Midtown to Sag Harbor was 90 minutes on a clear day. Lorenzo did it in 45 with Tommy Vitali beside him, and the city turning into smears of color outside the passenger window. He found Sophia in her bed, wrapped in a quilt, color returning slowly to her lips. He found Celeste in the corridor, already weeping in that exact measured way, already rehearsed. "Ren, she locked herself in, she is spiraling, she is depressed. We cannot wait any longer. We have to call Dr. Lane tonight," the words tumbling out as a preformed case. Tommy did not look at Celeste. Tommy walked to the pool house. Tommy ran his thumb along the inside of the cedar door, where a child's fingernails had scraped fresh pale marks into the wood, and then along the brass deadbolt, whose tongue was mounted so that it could only be thrown from the outside. He photographed both. He said nothing in the corridor. He only met Lorenzo's eyes, once, over Celeste's shoulder, and Lorenzo saw in that look the shape of something he could not yet name. He went upstairs alone. He sat on the edge of Sophia's bed for the first time in 6 months. She was half asleep. She opened her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, and her throat was raw. She locked the door. I heard her. From the outside. Lorenzo did not answer in words. He took her small hand, the one that had pounded the cedar, and he closed both of his around it, and he held it there until her eyelids came down. Then he went into the hall, took out his personal phone, and called a doctor in Bay Shore, whose name was not Whitmore. "I need you to come tonight. My daughter." Discreet. Nothing through the house physician. 1 hour. The doctor from Bay Shore came at 9, examined Sophia for 34 minutes under a desk lamp in the nursery, and left Lorenzo a single sheet of paper in the study afterward. Chlorine exposure at a concentration consistent with industrial overdose. No evidence of self-inflicted positioning. Fingernail trauma on both hands consistent with attempted escape, not suicidal surrender. Lorenzo read it twice. He paid the doctor in cash. He thanked him with the formality of a man who had already begun to move into a colder season inside himself. Then he went down to his office, shut the door, turned the key, and began the kind of investigation he had not run against anyone in his own house since the year his father died. He did it the way the Castellanos had always crime-bossed it, methodically, silently, without mercy and without haste. He pulled out a fresh legal pad. He wrote a single name at the top. He did not underline it. He did not need to. Adriana. By 11 o'clock, Tommy Vitale had slipped in through the side entrance with a manila envelope tucked inside his coat. The medical chart from Southampton Hospital, pulled through a cousin in the records department whose silence had been purchased years ago for a very different reason. Lorenzo laid the chart flat on the blotter and turned pages. Adriana's file. 3 visits in the past 18 months. A routine physical in April. A mild ankle sprain in September. A gynecological follow-up in January. On the intake form for the April physical, beside the printed line that read allergies, the patient had written, in her own looping hand, "None known." Lorenzo sat very still. Adriana Castellano had been violently allergic to penicillin since she was 9 years old. She had always worn, for 10 years of his memory, a silver medical bracelet on her right wrist. He had watched her refuse amoxicillin after a dental infection in Rome. He had filled out 3 separate emergency contact forms at this same hospital with his own hand, writing "Sever penicillin allergy EpiPen on person" in capital letters, because the nurses never read small print carefully enough. He turned the page. He turned the next. On all 3 recent intake forms, the allergy line was blank. A woman did not forget that allergy. A woman did not write "None known," unless, of course, none were known to her. He pulled up the house security archive. 6 months, every camera. The system was proprietary, installed by a Castellano specialist, and only 4 people had administrator credentials: himself, Tommy, the head of the on-grounds detail, and because she had requested access in the months after her return, to feel safer, Adriana. He dumped the logs into a side file and ran an integrity check. The algorithm flagged, within 11 minutes, 47 segments of footage that had been rewritten at the byte level by the administrator account assigned to his wife. Conservatory, 3A. M. Tuesday. Master bedroom, 12:12 p.m. The afternoon Mrs. O'Brien had been accused. Garden path, afternoon of the pool. The edited windows lined up with exactly the events she had needed covered. He moved to banking. Household accounts he signed. Personal accounts he did not examine. He examined them now. Across the past 19 months, small transfers $8,000 here, $12,000 there. Never an amount that tripped federal reporting had moved from a discretionary expense account. Adriana managed into a corporate holding in the Caymans registered to a shell called Port Adriatic LLC, whose ultimate beneficial owner, on the paperwork he could see, was listed only as trustee 4,418. He wrote the number on the legal pad, Silas Hartwell, Lorenzo's family attorney for 9 years. Lorenzo pulled his calendar through a back channel and laid 3 weeks of it beside the Plaza Hotel's visitor log, the hotel where Lorenzo had sat in the conference room that afternoon while his daughter was drowning. Hartwell had taken a suite, paid in cash, 3 times in the past month. Each visit overlapped with a block Hartwell's own office calendar had labeled court filing prep. On the second visit, the hotel's own service lift logs, which Lorenzo obtained with 2 phone calls, showed an unscheduled male visitor riding to Hartwell's floor and staying 40 minutes. No name, no signature. A man who knew the plaza well enough to avoid the concierge desk entirely. Lorenzo set the pen down. He did not move for a long time. The legal pad had filled. The picture had assembled itself, the way a mosaic becomes a face when enough tiles are in place. He understood now why Celeste had risen so quickly. When he once asked who Dr. Lane was, he understood why Adriana had insisted on the security upgrade the year she came home. He understood why Mrs. O'Brien had gone out of the house on a framed theft, and why the pool had been chlorinated to industrial concentration on a Wednesday afternoon. What he did not do was act. Not yet. A man in his chair who confronted too soon lost the chain. Lorenzo had learned this from his father at 14 years old, sitting on a crate in a Brooklyn back room while a traitor was identified and allowed to walk for 3 more weeks before the rope tightened. Let them believe you are still asleep, Ren. Wake up only on the night you strike. At 2 minutes past midnight, Celeste appeared in the office doorway in a silk robe. Her hair was down. Her eyes were soft with practiced worry. Ren, she said gently, you haven't come up. Are you all right, my love? Lorenzo looked up from the legal pad, which by then he had already slid under a property deed. He smiled the particular warm, tired smile of a husband who was simply working too late. Just family business, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about. She crossed the room, kissed the top of his head, the same kiss she had performed 100 times, and withdrew. The door closed. He waited 30 seconds. Then his personal phone buzzed. Not the house line, not the office line, the private line whose number was known only to one person still alive. The woman who had pulled him out of the warehouse in Red Hook in 2017, Elena Vasquez calling. Lorenzo did not drive himself. A driver he trusted, a man named Pauly, who had been christened in the same Brooklyn parish as Lorenzo's father, took him across the Verrazano and up through Bayonne at 1 in the morning, the black sedan threading empty side streets to avoid the toll cameras. The safe house Elena kept in Jersey City sat on the 4th floor of a brick walk-up above a shuttered Polish bakery on Newark Avenue. No nameplate. No buzzer. A steel door behind a steel door. Elena opened the inner one herself. She was in jeans and a gray wool sweater, her reading glasses still pushed up into her hair, and the flat at her back was lit only by a single banker's lamp on a kitchen table that had been turned into a workstation. Papers spread in 3 neat rows. A photograph enlargement clipped to an easel. A slim steel-cased laptop opened to a results window. Mrs. O'Brien rose from the end of the couch as Lorenzo stepped in. She did not speak. She waited to see what this version of the man she had raised from boyhood would do to her first. Lorenzo crossed the room in 4 strides and took both of her hands. Margaret, I am sorry. I believed them, and I did not believe you. I will not ask your forgiveness tonight. I will ask it when my daughter is safe. Mrs. O'Brien's eyes filled, but she only nodded once and stepped aside so Elena could do her work. Elena did not soften it. She put the Bellini family photograph on the table. She put the 2 ring images beside it. She put the expired passport scan beside that. She put the Prague fire file, the non-existent private clinic, the Vavrinek dossier, the Duca financial trail of 2010 and 11, the empty grave in Presidio, Texas. She walked Lorenzo through every piece in the order a prosecutor walks a jury through exhibits. She did it in 18 minutes. Lorenzo did not interrupt. He only listened, and his face did the thing his father's face had crime boss the night Pearl Harbor was announced on the radio, which was nothing at all. At the end, he said only, DNA. Elena had been waiting for it. She slid a single folded sheet across the table. Margaret left the estate with something no one noticed. The hairbrush from the vanity. 3 strands with follicle root intact. I ran it last night against the DNA panel on file at the maternity clinic where your wife delivered Sophia in 2018. I had to open some old favors to pull that record, but I pulled it. The panels do not match, Lorenzo. They do not even come close. The woman who slept in your bed last night is not the woman who gave birth to your daughter. Lorenzo picked up the page. He read it. He set it back down. He sat in the wooden chair Elena had placed for him, and did not move, and did not speak, and did not blink for a very long time. Elena did not fill the silence. Mrs. O'Brien did not fill the silence. Outside, a single bus went by on Newark Avenue, and its brakes hissed, and the room returned to quiet. When he spoke, 5 minutes later, his voice had dropped an entire register. And Adriana, my Adriana, where is she? Elena chose her words the way a surgeon chooses an incision. I crime boss it know yet, but I am certain of one thing now. She did not die in that accident on the Montauk Highway in the summer of 2022. The body your family buried was not hers. The dental records used to identify the remains were pulled from a clinic in Queens, whose owner sold his records in bulk and retired to Florida the month after. Somebody swapped her out. And Lorenzo, if Celeste and Duca went to the trouble of putting a body in that car instead of simply killing your wife, they had a reason. Nobody keeps a hostage alive for 2 years unless she is worth more to them alive than dead. Lorenzo's jaw worked once. He said very quietly, then she is alive. Assume yes. Plan as if yes. He drove back to Sag Harbor with Pauly at 2 in the morning through a thin, cold rain. He entered the estate through the kitchen gate. He climbed the servants' staircase barefoot, in stocking feet, the way he had as a boy sneaking home from altar boy duty. Sophia's room was dark, except for the crescent moon nightlight her real mother had installed. She slept, curled around the bear, one small hand fisted in his fur. Lorenzo sat on the rug beside the bed without touching her. He reached under her arm, with the care of a man diffusing something, and withdrew puddles an inch at a time until he could slide 2 fingers into the seam along the back. The black notebook came out in his palm as if it had been waiting for him. He took it to the bay window. He clicked on a small pocket flashlight and shielded the beam with his hand. He turned pages. A whale with a crown, a Ferris wheel, a seashell labeled Nantucket. His wife's handwriting unmistakable, unforgeable. The small looped G he had teased her about for a decade beside each one. The king of the cold water. When you turn 8, our summer when you are 10. Stars beside each promise. His throat closed. Then 3 stars. The most stars on any page, a child's clumsy drawing of a lighthouse painted in red and white stripes on the edge of a cliff. A woman and a little girl standing at its base. And in Adriana's hand, in pale pencil beneath the picture, where the stars land, M.M. Lorenzo stared at the single initial and heard Adriana's voice from a long summer ago, on the terrace of this very house, laughing about a plot of rocky land her grandmother had left her up in Maine. "Ren, you have to take me there one summer. The lighthouse on the property hasn't worked in 30 years, but the view, and he had nodded and said one day, and they had never gone." He turned to the last filled page. In his daughter's 7-year-old printing, beside a 5-pointed star, Lighthouse, Marcus. Lorenzo did not slam any doors that night. He did not wake his wife. He did not reach for the custom Colt that lived in a walnut drawer beside his bed. A man who shot first on the night he learned the truth was a man who lost the woman, the daughter, and the enemy all at once. And Lorenzo Castellano had not survived 15 years at the head of this family by being the first kind of man. He went back downstairs with the notebook under his arm. He poured 2 fingers of his father's cognac, did not drink it, and sat at his desk until the sky over Sag Harbor turned from black to the color of old pewter. By 5 in the morning he had a plan. By 6 he had people. Tommy Vitali came in through the kitchen entrance at 6 to 10, unshaven, his overcoat buttoned wrong. He had driven from Bensonhurst in 28 minutes on Lorenzo's single-coded text. Elena Vasquez arrived at 6:40 with Mrs. O'Brien beside her, both carrying thermoses of coffee, and neither of them asking to sit before Lorenzo gestured them to chairs. Miguel Ramirez was brought in last, through the servant's door, with mud still on his boots from the morning watering. He stood with his cap in his hands and did not know why the crime boss of the house had sent for him until Lorenzo rose and thanked him, by name, for saving Sophia's life at the pool 2 days earlier. "Whatever I ask of you today, Miguel," Lorenzo said, "is something I am asking, not ordering. You are not in our life. You can walk out of this room right now and no one in this family will look at you differently. I only want men and women who choose to stand at this table." Miguel looked at the floor for 3 seconds. Then he looked up. "The little girl called me Senor the first week I worked here, crime boss Castellano. Nobody here calls me Senor. I stay." Lorenzo laid out the plan in the library with the doors bolted and the drapes drawn. The strategy had 2 sides, and the sides had to move as one. The first side was a rescue. Elena would leave at dusk with Tommy and 4 of the most trusted soldiers in the Castellano second-rank men who had buried Lorenzo's father, men whose loyalty no amount of Duca money could have touched. They would fly private to Portland under commercial cover names and drive up the coast to the stretch of rocky shore where Adriana's grandmother's land had sat unvisited for 2 decades. Elena would work the details of the lighthouse itself, staffing, approach, perimeter from the inside of a rented cottage 20 minutes south of the property. Mrs. O'Brien would stay with Sophia in a safe apartment Elena kept in Chelsea, because Sophia was now the most valuable person in the Northeast, and Sophia would not leave Mrs. O'Brien's sight for any reason. The second side was theater. Lorenzo would remain in the Sag Harbor estate. He would eat breakfast with Celeste. He would ask her about her spa appointments and her book club. He would smile and kiss her forehead and let her believe, for as many hours as Elena needed, that nothing had changed. The moment Elena pulled Adriana out of that lighthouse alive and called on a satellite line, Lorenzo would close the trap from the inside and no one on the Celeste end of the table. Not her, not Hartwell, not Whitmore, not Marcus DeLuca, would have a single minute of warning. "The only weak seam," Tommy said quietly, "is the child. If Celeste panics before we move, the child becomes leverage." Lorenzo did not answer right away. Then he said, "The child is leaving this house tonight, before any of the rest of it starts. Elena takes her out at 9, through the kitchen gate, during the shift change. Miguel walks her. I stay visible in the dining room until midnight so the cameras see only me." They nodded. They rose. The meeting ended without a handshake, because handshakes were for men whose words still needed a ceremony. The people in this room were past that. Lorenzo climbed the stairs alone at 7:30. He did not knock at Sophia's door. He unlocked it with his own key and went in on socked feet. She was already awake, sitting up against the pillows with Mr. Puddles in her arms, as if she had known he was coming. The flashlight from the night before still lay on the bay window where he had left it. He crossed the room, and for the second time in his adult life, the first had been beside his father's body in a Brooklyn morgue. Lorenzo Castellano went down onto his knees. He took both of her small hands in both of his. "Piccola, Daddy was very wrong. Daddy did not listen to you. Daddy believed a lie over his own blood for a year, and there is no excuse for that, and there will never be one. I do not ask you to forgive me today. I ask only that one day, when you are older, you give Daddy the chance to earn it." Sophia did not speak at first. She slid off the bed. She put both arms around his neck and pressed her small cheek against the place where his collar met his throat, the place her mother had always put her forehead to. She whispered into his ear, "Mommy's at the lighthouse where the stars land. I remember Daddy. I remember her." Lorenzo made a sound he had not made since the morning they told him his father was dead. He bent his head against his daughter's hair, and for a long minute the only thing in the room was a man who had not wept in 2 years, weeping. Neither of them saw, in the carved wooden crown of the canopied bed above them, 3 inches from the central rosette, tucked into a whorl of the gilded scrollwork, where a housekeeper dusting with a feather duster would never look the pinhole lens of a camera whose wireless feed ran, uninterrupted, to a second phone in a compartment behind an oil painting 1 floor below. Celeste, in the kitchen, watched the feed on her palm for 11 seconds. She did not move. She did not make a sound. She switched to the encrypted line and thumbed 3 words across to the number stored under no name. "He knows. Protocol 3. Tommy drove ahead of the sedan that carried Sophia and Mrs. O'Brien and Elena out of Sag Harbor that evening, and for the first 40 miles of the Long Island Expressway, neither he nor Lorenzo, on the phone between them, said anything that was not strictly operational. Only when the city lights came up ahead of the windshield and the girl had been handed off safely to the Chelsea apartment did Tommy allow himself the single question the two of them had avoided for 15 years. "Ren, are you sure it is him?" Lorenzo was back at the Sag Harbor estate by then, in his office with the curtains drawn and a whiskey on the desk he still had not touched. His voice came through the earpiece, quiet and old. "Who else would hate me enough to take 12 years to do it properly, Tommy? Who else would keep her alive? A stranger kills you. Family carves you." Tommy was quiet. He knew the answer, the way Lorenzo knew it. The two of them had stood together at a pier in Red Hook in the summer of 2011 and seen Marcus DeLuca, crime boss Castellano Sr.'s own underboss for 17 years, step out of a shadow with 3 men behind him and put a shotgun round through the chest of the man who had taught him how to hold a fork. They had seen the father collapse against a piling. They had watched Marcus kneel, cross himself, Tommy, and walk back into the dark as if he had completed an errand. Lorenzo had been 22, and the oldest son, and by the end of that week the crime boss. What he did in the following 6 months he had crime bosse in the particular cold way of a young man who had not yet learned how to grieve and had substituted geometry instead. He traced DeLuca across 3 states. He found him in a ranch house outside Laredo, being hidden by a cartel cousin who owed the DeLucas an old debt. He pulled Marcus out of that house at 3 in the morning with 4 soldiers and drove him 90 miles west into a stretch of empty country past Presidio, Texas. He made him kneel. He spoke into his ear the only sentence he had ever rehearsed, which was the sentence his father had taught him to speak in front of a traitor, so the traitor would die understanding. "You took a man who fed you at his own table. Now the table is closed." He put 2 rounds into the back of DeLuca's skull at 11 minutes past 4 in the morning, and he left the body in the Hoya scrub where the coyotes and the sun would finish what he had started. He had believed, for 15 years, that he had closed that door. He had been wrong. Elena's intelligence, pieced together across 3 continents in the weeks after the DNA result, would eventually sketch the other half of the story, the half Lorenzo would not hear in full until much later, but whose shape he and Tommy could already see by the time the sedan carrying Sophia reached the Midtown Tunnel. The shooter had been young, 23, new to the soldiers' roster. What Lorenzo had not known at the time was that this particular soldier's older brother had married into the Duca line 2 years earlier and owed Marcus nearly $400,000 for a failed investment he had not dared take to anyone else. The 2 shots had gone into the upper shoulder and the side of the neck instead of the base of the skull, a placement the young man had been paid, handsomely, to arrange. Marcus had played dead in the dirt for 40 minutes until the taillights were gone. A cousin of the cartel cousin had come for him with a jeep and a trauma kit. He had lost a great deal of blood, and most of the use of his left arm. He had been smuggled across the river, through Sinaloa, onto a cargo container out of Manzanillo, and off a dock in Rotterdam 6 weeks later, under a name that did not belong to him. He had spent the next 7 years in a slow, careful, penniless resurrection Prague, Budapest, a laundering contact named Vavrnek, a reconstructed bank, a reconstructed life. By 2018 he had money again. By 2020 he had men. By 2021 he had the patience of a man who understood he could not win by gun, because in a gunfight across an ocean the Castellanos would still bury him. He would have to win by subtraction, by taking from Lorenzo, one by one, the things Lorenzo loved, until Lorenzo lived inside a house that had nothing left in it but his own heartbeat. Celeste Bellini he had found in a Prague casting agency that had stopped calling her back. She was 31, broke, drinking, and sick to the bone with envy of a twin sister who had become a New York Mafia wife, while Celeste herself had become a woman who paid her rent in a currency she did not want to name. Marcus had bought her dinner. He had listened. He had handed her, across 6 months of such dinners, a story she could tell herself about fairness, about what she was owed, about a sister who had not deserved the life she had gotten. He had handed her a mirror and asked her, gently, what she would be if she stepped through it. The training had taken 3 years. Voice. Handwriting. The small scar beside Adriana's left eyebrow. 10,000 photographs. 1,000 hours of home video obtained through a Castellano domestic, who had been on DeLuca's payroll since 2020. The car on the Montauk Highway in the summer of 2022 had been driven by a stand-in hired through a check agency who had not known, until the last mile, what was about to happen to her. Adriana herself had been taken the night before, sedated, driven north through 3 state lines to the Granite Point on the Maine coast where her grandmother's forgotten lighthouse waited. And Celeste, the day after the funeral, had walked into the Sag Harbor estate in a black dress with pearls at her throat and stayed. The endgame had never been only revenge. It had been erasure. Separate Lorenzo from the daughter by staging the daughter as unstable. Commit the daughter to a private facility, a facility already bought, already staffed, already waiting, from which a 7-year-old would emerge, years later, as something gentler and more compliant, and no longer able to tell anyone where her real mother had gone. Strip the Castellano assets through Silas Hartwell's quiet legal architecture into holdings that would land, by routes no prosecutor would ever untangle, back in the hands of the DeLuca line, and leave Lorenzo alive, sitting in an empty stone house on the coast, a widower twice, a father of a child in a ward, a crime boss of a family whose treasury had bled out through 100 tidy pinholes. That was the plan that had begun with a glass at a peace dinner. That was the plan that, at 11:57 on a Wednesday night, Marcus DeLuca read He Knows, Protocol 3, on a phone 3,000 miles from Sag Harbor, in a stone house of his own on a cliff, and understood had just begun to come apart. The safe apartment in Chelsea sat on the 8th floor of a pre-war building on West 23rd Street, above a florist that had been closing at 6 in the evening since the Nixon years. It had 3 bedrooms, a reinforced front door, and a window overlooking an airshaft nobody ever thought to photograph from. Elena had maintained it under a dummy corporation called Hudson Orchid Holdings for 9 years. 3 people in the city knew the address. Sophia Castellano, as of 9:47 on Wednesday evening, was the 4th. Mrs. O'Brien put the kettle on in the small galley kitchen. Miguel set Sophia's overnight bag on the couch and stepped out onto the fire escape to watch the street. Elena knelt on the rug at the foot of the sofa where the child had sat down, still holding Mr. Puddles, still not speaking. "Sophia, honey, look at me." The child looked at her. "In 1 hour I am getting on a plane. I am going to the lighthouse. I am going to bring your mother home. But the building is very big, and the island is dark, and there are places I can miss if I crime boss it already know where to look. You are the only person in the world who has been inside that lighthouse while your mother was still happy. I need you to close your eyes and tell me everything you remember. Any smell, any song, any number, any color. There are no wrong answers. The small things are the ones that matter." Sophia closed her eyes. For a moment, Elena watched the small face work, the forehead furrow, the mouth press, and thought the child had gone too tired, too young, too overloaded to reach the memory at all. Then Sophia began to speak, softly and steadily, the way her real mother had once taught her to recite a long poem by standing still and breathing first. It's past the town where the lobster boat painted red is tied up. The boat is called Evangeline. Mommy made me say the name 3 times because she liked how it sounded. After the town, there's a road with a big yellow house and then a smaller road that goes down to the water. At the bottom of the cliff, there are 17 steps up to the door of the tower. I counted them twice. Mommy let me count them. Elena wrote 17 steps Evangeline Yellow House into a small notebook without taking her eyes from Sophia's face. The big light on top of the tower is painted like a candy cane, red and white going around and around. Most lighthouses are just white, but this one isn't. Mommy said her grandma painted it that way on purpose a long time ago, so children would see it from the road and not be scared. The child's eyes opened halfway, looking at something Elena could not see, and Mommy showed me on a map once. On a paper map, not a phone. The name it starts with a T, Tanner's Point? No, Thatcher's Point. That was it. Elena had already pulled her laptop open on the coffee table. Thatcher's Point Light, Knox County, Maine. Private. Deeded since 1987 to the estate of a Mrs. Rosalba Bellini, deceased 2008 Adriana's maternal grandmother. Transferred in 2022, under a probate filing Elena had never seen, to a holding company called North Point Heritage Properties, whose officers traced through 3 shells into the same Cayman trust Lorenzo had flagged in his own ledger the night before. That's it, Elena said quietly. We have it. Sophia reached into her overnight bag. She lifted out the small black notebook with both hands, as if it weighed more than it did, and held it out across the rug. This is Mommy's. Please, take it with you. When you find her, tell her Sophia remembered. Elena took the notebook with both hands, too, the way a priest takes a sacrament. She did not open it. She only slid it into the inner pocket of her jacket, against the lining, over her ribs. I promise you. Before I speak my own name to her, I will tell her you remembered. An hour and 12 minutes later, the Gulf Stream lifted off a private strip in Farmingdale with Elena, Tommy, 4 Castellano soldiers, and a second bag containing 1 black notebook, 1 sat phone, 3 suppressed sidearms, and a thermal monocular. By the time the plane banked north over the Sound, Sophia was asleep on Mrs. O'Brien's lap with Mr. Puddles under her chin. 100 miles south, in the dining room of the Sag Harbor estate, Lorenzo Castellano poured his wife a second glass of a Barolo he had decanted at 6. He had dimmed the chandeliers. He had told the staff to lay the table for 2. He had taken out the silver she loved. He had even played, through the speakers in the cornice, a recording of Puccini she had named at a dinner party 18 months ago, a moment Celeste had assumed he had forgotten, because men like him were supposed to forget things like that. He had not forgotten. He had filed it, the way a man files details that may one day be useful. She sat across from him in a dark green silk dress that had not been Adriana's. She picked at the veal. She lifted the wine and did not drink it. Her phone, face down beside her plate, had buzzed twice in the past 20 minutes, and both times she had flinched at the small sound as if at a door being knocked upon. Amori, he said softly, reaching across the linen to cover her hand with his own. What's wrong? You look troubled. She attempted the smile. It did not reach the eyes. Nothing. Just I dreamed of Adriana last night. Of her, I mean. Before the accident. Lorenzo's thumb moved once across her knuckles. He let 3 seconds pass. Then he said, with every ounce of warmth he had ever used on her, and with a cold so deep beneath it that the cold did not rise into his voice at all. What a coincidence, sweetheart. So did I. The fog came in off the Atlantic at 2:30 in the morning, the way Maine fog does on the coast in October, not as weather but as a living thing, rolling up the granite and swallowing whatever it reached first. Elena Vasquez counted that as a gift. Thatcher's Point Light sat at the tip of a rocky spur 40 minutes south of Rockland, and the 2 men Duca had posted at its base had night vision goggles but no thermal gear, and in fog that thick night vision was a man's enemy more than his ally. The Castellano team came in on foot from the South Ridge. Black jackets, no radios, hand signals only. Tommy took point. Elena walked 2 paces behind him with the notebook against her ribs. The 4 soldiers moved in a loose, staggered line that could collapse into a firing position in under 2 seconds if it needed to. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the Atlantic against the granite below and the cry of a single turn somewhere in the white. The 2 sentries were at the door of the keeper's cottage, not the tower. One of them was on his phone, which was also a gift. Tommy took the nearer man at the neck with a forearm and a blade in one motion, lowered him without a sound onto the damp grass, and the second soldier handled the man with the phone before the screen had time to dim. The phone itself went into a Faraday pouch in Tommy's coat pocket, so no emergency signal would fly back to Prague or wherever Marcus DeLuca was standing tonight. The door of the tower itself stood at the base of 17 stone steps cut into the cliff. Elena counted them as she went up, as a 7-year-old had counted them once, and reached 17 exactly where Sophia had promised she would. The door was oak banded in iron, newer than the tower, fitted into the old frame with the kind of precision that said a locksmith had been paid well and told to say nothing. Tommy had the lock open in 2 minutes and 40 seconds with a pry bar and a pick. The spiral staircase inside smelled of brine and unwashed linen. They went up slowly. At the top was a single circular room, what had once been the lantern gallery, what had once housed the great Fresnel lens that had guided schooners off this coast for nearly a century. The lens had been removed a long time ago. What had replaced it, behind a second steel-reinforced door, was a cell. Tommy took that door too. It took longer, almost 6 minutes. When it opened, Elena stepped through first. The room on the other side was small and round and had no window, only 3 narrow slits in the stone, the old ventilation cuts for the lamp gas, each one now barred. A single bulb in a wire cage burned from the ceiling. There was a cot along the curve of the wall, a small writing table, a porcelain basin, and on every inch of the curved stone, around all of it in charcoal, in pencil, in what looked like the blunt end of a burnt matchstick, the drawings of a woman who had been using her own hands to keep herself from losing her mind. Seashells. A Ferris wheel. A whale with a crown. The same images that had filled the black notebook pressed against Elena's ribs right now. And over and over and over, in the center of every blank curve of stone the woman had been able to reach, the face of a little girl. Adriana Castellano sat on the edge of the cot. She was in a gray cotton shift that was too big for her. Her hair had gone long and streaked with premature silver at the temples. Her skin had the particular paleness of a person who had not stood in direct sunlight in 26 months. She did not rise when the door opened. She did not lift her head. She had, long ago, trained herself not to hope when a door opened. Elena crossed the room and went down onto both knees in front of the cot, so that her face was below the woman's face, so that nothing about her shape read as threat. Mrs. Castellano, my name is Elena Vasquez. Your husband Lorenzo sent me. Your daughter told us where to find you. Elena's voice did not break, but it softened until it could barely be heard. Sophia remembered, ma'am. She remembered the lighthouse where the stars land. Adriana's head lifted. Her eyes, in the pale bulb light, were the same eyes in every portrait Lorenzo had ever owned of her, and they filled now with a kind of weeping that was almost silent, because silent weeping was all this room had ever allowed. My baby, she whispered. My baby remembered? Elena reached inside her jacket. She laid the black notebook in Adriana's hands. Adriana opened it. Her fingers shook on the first page. She pressed her mouth against the paper. Then she reached beneath her own pillow and drew out a second notebook, spiral-bound, gray, the kind a visitor might have tossed her as a kindness, and opened it across her knees so Elena could see. Every single page was Sophia. Sophia at 4, at 5, at 6, at imagined 7. Sophia in her school pinafore. Sophia with Mr. Puddles. Sophia under the canopied bed. Hundreds of small portraits drawn from memory to keep a mother's mind from going dark. Elena closed her eyes for a half-second. Then she stood, lifted Adriana to her feet. The woman weighed almost nothing, wrapped her in Tommy's coat, and began the careful walk down the spiral stairs. Tommy made sure nothing was left in the cell that said Castellano soldiers had been there. The 2 sentries went into the sea off the South Rocks, where the tide would take them before daylight. Elena walked Adriana across the wet grass to the waiting van, loaded her into the back seat between Mrs. O'Brien's youngest brother and a blanket, and pulled the sat phone out of her pocket. She pressed one key. Lorenzo, we have her. She's alive. She is in the van. Trigger the trap. In the dining room of the Sag Harbor estate, 1,290 miles south, Lorenzo set his coffee cup carefully down on the saucer. He looked up across the linen at the woman in the dark green silk dress. Her hand was still around the stem of her wine glass. Her phone had gone quiet. The Puccini from the cornice speakers had wound down and was playing the last few soft bars before the end of the aria. He let the silence finish the music. Then, Very quietly, he said. Celeste. The wineglass stopped halfway between the linen and her mouth. Her face did not change. Her face had been trained, through 3 years and 10,000 photographs and a great deal of Marcus DeLuca's money, never to change. But her shoulders, the small intercostal muscles between her ribs, the only part of a trained liar that she could not discipline, locked. And Lorenzo, who had spent a lifetime watching men's ribs across tables, saw it. She was frozen. Celeste Bellini did not scream. Celeste Bellini did not run. A woman who had trained for 3 years to be someone else did not have the reflexes of a woman caught stealing a wallet. She had the reflexes of a woman who knew, at the top of her spine, that her partner had already calculated what to do with her the moment the plan broke. Lorenzo did not shout the name twice. He did not need to. Tommy Vitali came in through the dining room doorway with 2 soldiers a half-second later. Silas Hartwell, who had been waiting in the library for a signature on a document he would now never receive, was lifted out of his armchair and walked down to the kitchen without a word being said to him. Doctor. Harold Whitmore was picked up from his own home in West Hampton at 3:30 in the morning, still in his dressing gown, by 2 men who introduced themselves only as family friends. Celeste talked. Elena sat across a plain metal table from her in a Castellano-owned warehouse in Maspeth for 4 hours and listened, and by dawn a pen had moved across 16 pages of statement. Marcus DeLuca had gone silent to her on the encrypted line the moment her single he knows reached his phone. Silent, and then gone a man who, she understood with the cold clarity of a woman who had finally stopped being useful to him, had a banned crime bossed her the instant her value expired. She had expected Lorenzo to put a bullet in her. He did not. Lorenzo Castellano, at the end of the longest night of his adult life, chose a harder punishment. He gave her to the United States of America. Elena placed the call to a contact at the Eastern District of New York at 7 in the morning. The kidnapping and identity theft case that federal prosecutors would open within the week would keep Celeste Bellini alive in a federal facility for decades. Lorenzo did not attend the transfer. He did not want to see her face again. Marcus DeLuca was a different matter. Tommy flew east on a private aircraft 2 days later with 4 men and a single duffel bag. He returned after 96 hours. He came into Lorenzo's office in Brooklyn, set his hat on the chair, and said only one sentence. Crime boss DeLuca won't trouble us again, Mr. Castellano. The Lord will sort him out. Lorenzo nodded once. Neither man ever spoke the name Marcus DeLuca again. Silas Hartwell was disbarred within a month. Dr. Whitmore lost his license, his practice, and, when the federal indictment came down, the last of the small dignity of his name. Neither man would ever again sit at a table where a Castellano was present. Adriana came home on a Thursday afternoon in the first week of November, in the back of a black sedan, with Mrs. O'Brien beside her, and a cashmere blanket across her knees. She had been in a private psychiatric facility in Westchester for 12 days under the care of a trauma specialist. Elena had vetted personally. She was still too thin. Her hair was still streaked with silver. She would one day decide not to die. But her eyes were her eyes. Sophia was in the great front hall when the car pulled up the drive. She had been practicing the walk to the door all morning in her head. She took 4 steps onto the black and white marble. Then she stopped. She had seen the wrong mother walk through that door too many times to cross the remaining distance on faith alone. Adriana stepped into the foyer. She did not speak. She did not reach. She knelt, slowly, on the cold marble, and opened her palms toward her daughter. Her voice came out in a thread. Starlight, star bright, the first star I see tonight. Sophia's face broke open the way a dam breaks. She ran the last 12 feet of that hall and threw herself into her mother's arms and sobbed the full sob of a child who has not been allowed, for more than a year, to believe that mothers come back. Lorenzo stood behind them in the shadow of the archway. His eyes were red. He did not step forward. That moment did not belong to him. It belonged to the 2 people whose voices the house had stolen. Healing came, as healing does, in small furniture. Adriana spent 1 full month with the trauma specialist before she asked to sleep in her own bed again, and Lorenzo agreed without question. Mrs. O'Brien returned to the estate on a Tuesday morning with a jar of red currant preserves she had put up herself, and the cook wept quietly into the saucepan when she handed it over. Lorenzo and Sophia began, of all things, with ice cream 2 scoops, chocolate and strawberry, in waffle cones at a small shop on Main Street in Sag Harbor. On the first Saturday in December, he walked her home along the water. He let her tell him, in her own time and in her own order, everything she had been carrying alone. The last scene was a study, in late winter, in the late gold light of a 4 o'clock sun. Adriana sat in the wing chair by the fire with a book. Lorenzo sat at the desk going over papers he was no longer in a hurry to finish. Sophia lay on her stomach on the rug with a fresh sketch pad and a box of colored pencils. She stood up. She crossed the rug. She held out her newest drawing. 3 figures: a man at a desk, a woman in a chair, a little girl on a rug. Warm yellow light washing across all 3. Behind them, against the paper, nothing. No shadows. No watching shapes. No dark at the corners. Only the quiet white of a page that had been allowed, at last, to be a page. Lorenzo looked at it for a long time. Then he drew his daughter into his lap, pressed his lips against the crown of her hair, and said softly, "Piccola, Daddy will never stop listening again. Never." Sophia tucked her head into the hollow of his shoulder. "I know, Daddy. Sometimes the traitor is not a stranger. Sometimes the greatest crime is refusing to listen to a child. And sometimes the smallest voice in the house is the only voice telling the truth." If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded today to listen. Truly listen to the people they love. We post stories like this one every week, and your support is what keeps these stories reaching the hearts they are meant for. Tell us in the comments below, have you ever had a moment in your life when you realized, too late or just in time, that someone small was telling you the truth when no one else was? Has there ever been a Sophia in your own life? A child, a sibling, a quiet voice whose warning you almost missed? We read every comment, and we would love to hear your reflection from the bottom of your heart. Thank you for staying until the end. From all of us here, we wish you good health, peaceful days, and a home where every voice, especially the smallest one, is always heard. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next story.